You run a business, or you lead a team, or you manage a portfolio of responsibilities that would overwhelm most people, and you do it well. You make decisions under pressure, you manage people, you show up day after day, and you deliver. And yet, when it comes to your own body, your weight, your energy, the way you feel and the way you look, something just hasn't clicked. You've started things, you've probably stopped things, and if you're honest, there's a quiet voice in the background that says, I should have just had it sorted by now. Or, I don't know why, but I just can't get this right. If that resonates, this episode is for you, because I want you to know that this is not a character flaw. It's not laziness, and it's not lack of discipline either. This is the executive body. Here's the interesting thing. There's a very specific reason why I see this pattern all the time, over and over again, in successful men. Once you understand it, everything starts to make sense. I speak to a lot of men, business owners, CEOs, COOs, dentists, architects, executives, lawyers, who have built genuinely impressive careers. They are smart, they are organized, they know how to get things done. And when I ask them about their health, I get a very specific type of answer. And it's not, I don't care about it, or health is not a priority, or it doesn't matter. The answer is usually something like, I know what I need to do, I just can't seem to do it consistently. Or, I was doing well for a few weeks and then things got busy and I fell off. Or simply, I tried a lot of things and nothing has stuck. And it's a massive contradiction because on paper, it makes zero sense. These are people who manage complexity for a living. They run companies, they close deals, they manage teams of 20, 50, 100 people. They handle things that are objectively much harder than eating well and exercising consistently. So why does this one area keep slipping? The answer, or the easy answer, and the one that most people give themselves, is motivation. I just need to want it more. I'm just not motivated enough, or I'll get serious when things calm down. And I want to challenge this frame directly because, in my experience, motivation is almost never the real problem. The men who we work with, who come to us and transform their bodies, and I've watched hundreds, if not thousands of them by now do it, they weren't unusually motivated. They weren't on a burning platform. Most of them hadn't had a catastrophic health event. They just finally had the right conditions around them. And that's the distinction. Conditions versus motivation is what this episode is really about. One thing I've noticed after coaching executives for nearly 2 decades is this. The men who struggle the most aren't the least disciplined. They're often the most disciplined. They're simply directing all of that discipline towards everyone else. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive load. It refers to the amount of mental capacity being used at any given time. And your brain, like any other system, has finite capacity. And when that capacity is being used up, the things that require self-regulation, forward planning, and willpower suffer first. And it's not a metaphor, it's well documented. Studies consistently show that people make worse decisions, have lower impulse control, and struggle more with self-regulation when their cognitive load is high. When your mental bandwidth is full, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that is responsible for long-term decision-making, starts to lose the battle against the part that just wants to take the path of least resistance. Now think about what a typical day looks like for a high-performing executive. You're making decisions from the moment you wake up. You are managing competing priorities. You're absorbing information, processing problems, responding to people. By the time you get to the evening, when most people try to exercise, plan meals, or make healthy choices, your tank is running low. And that's when the skip the gym decision happens. Not because you're weak, but because you're depleted. Here's what makes this particularly tricky for people like you. You are very good at pushing through. That's the part of how you got to where you are. You have high tolerance for discomfort, you can override tiredness, you can push, you can knuckle down, and you can get things done, even when you don't feel like it. Those traits serve you extremely well at work. But at the same time, they create a specific blind spot when it comes to your health. Because you tend to apply the same approach, push harder, try more, knuckle down, add more discipline to a problem that doesn't respond to that solution. You don't need more willpower, you've got plenty of it. What you're missing is a system that doesn't rely on willpower at all. But there's another layer to it. And it's just as important. Most high-achieving men have a very strong professional identity. They know exactly who they are in the context of work. They have standards, routines, accountability systems built up over years. But their health identity, it's vague. It's aspirational at best, I'd say. It might be rooted in who they were maybe 10, 15 years ago. They're sort of athlete, the fit person in their 20s or 30s, but it hasn't kept that same pace with the rest of their life. And here's the thing about identity. Behavior follows identity, not the other way around. Think about it for a second. Nobody has to convince a CEO to think like a CEO. He simply does because that's who he believes he is. Health works exactly the same way. You don't act your way into a new identity. You adopt the identity first, and then your actions begin to align with it. When someone's professional identity is strong and their health identity is weak, guess which one wins every time there's a conflict? The meeting usually beats the gym. The client beats the meal prep. The business beats the body. Not because you're making a conscious choice, but because your identity, the story that you've been telling yourself, has a very clear hierarchy. And health is unfortunately very low down on that hierarchy ladder. The third piece, and this is the most practical one, is structure. Think about your professional life for a second. Every important outcome in your business has a system behind it, a process, accountability, someone checking the numbers, a cadence of review, etc. Now, think about your health. What's the system? What's the accountability structure? Who's checking in? What are you tracking and why? For most people, the honest answer is nothing comparable. There might be a gym membership, maybe an app, maybe a rough intention to eat better, but nothing with the rigor of how you run the rest of your life. And the interesting thing is, you wouldn't run your business the way most people manage their health. No targets, no accountability, no KPIs, no data, no goals, no review process, just motivation, which, as we've covered, is the least reliable resource that you have. That is a structural gap. And it's fixable. I want to talk about what I've seen work. And not just the theory, but the real sort of patterns from real people. And one client who comes to mind is Dr. Miguel, who owned a successful dental practice and had spent years telling himself that work was simply too demanding. Every week, there was another reason why his health had to wait. More patients, more responsibility, more pressure. Then something interesting happened. He stopped asking, when will life come down? And started asking, how do I build a system that works while life stays exactly as is? That single shift changed everything. Over the following months, he lost more than 60 pounds of body fat. But perhaps the biggest change wasn't the weight. He stopped seeing himself as someone constantly trying to get back into shape. He became the man who simply lived that way. His identity changed. Another client of ours worked in private equity investors relations. Highly driven, constant travel, endless networking dinners, long hours, the sort of career where everyone tells you that your health simply becomes the price of success. And for years, he believed exactly that. Until one day he caught sight of himself in a hotel mirror while traveling for work. He barely recognized the man looking back in that mirror. He told me it wasn't shock, it wasn't even embarrassment, and it wasn't disappointment. He realized that the standards he'd built in his career simply weren't reflected in the man looking back at him. That wasn't the turning point because he suddenly became motivated. It was the turning point because he finally accepted that this current system wasn't producing the future that he wanted. Once we rebuilt the system around his real life, not the imaginary sort of perfect week, the weight came off, his energy returned, and 2 years later, he flew to London for a photo shoot, still in the best shape of his life. That's what sustainable change actually looks like. The variable wasn't motivation, it was the system. Based on everything I've seen, different people, different careers, different countries, different locations, the same 3 patterns appear over and over again. There are 3 things that consistently separate the people who transform their bodies from the people who just keep starting over. The first one is accountability. Accountability that has real weight, not the app that sends you a notification, not the vague commitment to yourself or, anything like that. Genuine accountability to another human being who knows what you've done and what you haven't done every single week. This sounds simple, but it's not common. And it's probably the single biggest factor. The second is structure that fits your actual life, not an ideal version of your life. Again, I cannot count how many programs fail because they were designed for someone with 2 hours free in the morning and no competing demands. That is not your life. If the system requires conditions that don't exist, it will fail the moment conditions change, which is constantly. And the third is clear understanding of the why, not the superficial one. Not that I want to look better for holiday or I want to have a 6-pack because I'm going on lads holidays or anything like that. The real one, the one that holds when the alarm goes off at 5 a.m. and you're tired and you have a full day ahead. For most of the men that we work with, it involves family, it involves being present, it involves not becoming a burden, it involves being able to do things in the 60s and 70s that most men their age simply can't. When those 3 things are in place, real accountability, a realistic structure, and a compelling reason, the cognitive load problem starts to solve itself because the decision has already been made. You're not relying on willpower in the moment. The system is doing the heavy lifting. I want to be clear about what I'm describing here because it's broader than just the physical. Every single client that we've worked with who has genuinely transformed their body talks about the simple and same ripple effect. They sleep better, their focus improves, their stress tolerance goes up, their relationships improve, their professional performance goes up. And interestingly, very few of them start talking about weight. I think about another client quite often he's a lawyer, super intelligent, disciplined, very successful. He'd tried personal trainers in the past, CrossFit, fasting, countless diets. None of it lasted. Not because he lacked discipline, because every attempt relied on motivation instead of structure. 4.5 months later, he'd lost over 30 pounds of body fat. But that's not the part he talks about now. What he remembers is standing on the beach without feeling the need to keep his shirt on for the first time in years. That's the real outcome, the confidence, the freedom, becoming the person he thought he'd left behind. That's what's on the other side of this. Not just a better body, a better operating system. So here's where I want to leave you today. If the contradiction I described at the start, I can run everything else, I just can't solve this, resonated with you, I want you to consider that the problem is not you. The problem is the approach. You've probably been trying to solve a structural problem with willpower. And willpower is the most unreliable resource that you have. It depletes, it runs out. It's exactly the wrong tool for a long-term outcome. What you need is a system, accountability, a structure that fits your actual life, and a reason that is more compelling than your next excuse. Those things are not complicated, but they do require someone to build them with you because you already have a full-time job, and this is not it. If today's episode resonated with you, I would encourage you to do two things. First, keep listening. Over the coming episodes, we're going to unpack the ideas that we've touched on today in much more detail. We'll talk about why discipline is often misunderstood, why most health advice fails busy professionals, and how stress changes the decisions you make without even realizing it, and how to build a body that's designed to support the next 20 years of your career, not just the next holiday. And secondly, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Every successful business eventually reaches a point where the systems that got it here won't get it there. And I think the same is true of your body. The strategies that got you through your 20s and your 30s probably aren't the ones that will carry you into your 50s and 60s. Which means perhaps the question isn't, how do I get back into shape? Perhaps it's, who do I need to become for the next chapter of my life? Because your body isn't separate from your career. It isn't separate from your leadership. It isn't separate from your family. It's the operating system behind all of them. And that's what this podcast is really about. If nothing changes, where will my health be in 5 years from now? Ask yourself this question. Not where you hope it will be, where it actually is heading. Sometimes that single question is enough to change everything. Thank you very much for spending this time with me today. I know your attention is valuable and I don't take it lightly. My hope isn't that this episode motivated you because, as we know, motivation fades. My hope is that it changed the way you think. Because when your thinking changes, your decisions change. And when your decisions change consistently enough, your life changes too. My name is Martin Bugaj. This is The Executive Body. I'll see you in the next one.